The city never slept. It convulsed. Hive perdition was a vertical ocean of steel and smoke, stretching from the poisoned clouds above to the molten sludge below. The air was thick enough to taste. Promethium soot, burnt oil, and the faint iron, tang of blood from the manufactorums that never stopped bleeding men dry. Every hour, a new shipment of corpses was dumped into the recycler pits. Every minute, someone vanished into the fog. And somewhere in the middle of that choking darkness, Cade Vorn waited for his contact. He sat alone in a bar that pretended to serve drinks. The counter was an old adamantine plate scavenged from a wrecked shuttle, and the amber liquid in his glass hadn't seen a real grape since before the heresy. The barkeep, an augmetic woman with one glowing optic and a face tattooed with faded ecclesiarchy prayers, pretended not to notice his presence. Everyone in perdition learned early. You don't stare at bounty hunters. You don't even think about them. The Vox Tower above the bar hummed with static sermons, the same monotonous voice echoing across the hive. Labor is loyalty. Doubt is death. The Emperor protects. Cade chuckled under his breath. Yeah, he muttered. He protects, but not for free. The door hissed open behind him. Cold air spilled in, laced with the smell of ozone and sanctified oil. Arbite's issue. Heavy boots approached, rhythm steady, each step echoing the sound of judgment. Vorn, the voice said, flat and mechanical, through a Vox filter. Cade didn't turn immediately. Arbites don't usually come slumming without an escort, he said, swirling his drink. Or a firing squad. I'm not on duty, the man replied. He slid into the seat across from Cade. His helmet stayed on, visor black and polished. I'm here with an opportunity. Funny, Cade said. That's what the last one said before he tried to shoot me. The Arbites ignored the comment and produced a data slate. Its surface flickered faintly, stamped with an inquisitorial sigil. Cade's smile vanished. Off the books, the Arbites continued. Target is a psyker, female. Escaped termination 6 days ago from processing cell 947. Believed to be hiding in the lower hives. Designation. Subject, Epsilon 31. Theta. Escaped psyker. Cade leaned back, exhaling through his teeth. That's a death sentence waiting to happen. You want me to bring her in, fine. But you didn't say for who. Does it matter? It always matters. The Arbites hesitated. The silence told Cade more than any confession. You're not with the local precinct, he said. You're contracting through them. That sigil, it's Inquisition work. Who's pulling your strings? Classified, the Arbite said. Payment is 50,000 thrones, alive if possible, dead if necessary. Cade whistled low. 50,000, enough to buy a new identity and disappear off-world. But jobs like that never ended clean. He reached for the data slate and scrolled through the target file. The grainy pict capture showed a young woman, no older than 20, gaunt, eyes wide with that haunted look all sanctioned psykers shared. Her hair was shaved on one side, a barcode burned into her temple, but there was something in her expression that froze him. Not fear, not madness, awareness. She doesn't look dangerous, he said quietly. Then you've never seen what one of them can do when cornered, the Arbites replied. You'll need proof of capture. This will record the kill or containment signal. He slid across a tracking beacon. It blinked weakly, red and pulsing. Do not attempt contact with the Inquisition directly. Deliver her to Docking Bay 17 once secured. You'll receive payment there. Cade stared at the beacon for a long moment. And if she's not just some psyker? He asked. If she's something else? The Arbite's visor tilted slightly. Then pray she dies before she finds out. When the enforcer left, the bar fell back into its usual silence. The servitor in the corner resumed polishing glasses it couldn't see. Cade turned the data slate over in his hand. 50,000 thrones. Enough to buy a clean ship. Enough to finally forget the faces that haunted him. He pocketed the device and stood. Guess we're back in business, he muttered. Outside, the hive breathed like a wounded animal. Gouts of flame rose from broken chimneys, lighting the smog in bursts of orange. The ground trembled from the weight of industry. Cade made his way toward the descent elevators, rusted cages that groaned as they sank toward the lower levels. The further down he went, the less the air tasted of air and more of despair. By the time he reached the mid-hive, sunlight was a myth. The tunnels were lined with rusting devotional plaques, thousands of tiny inscriptions reading, "The Emperor sees you." He passed a procession of flagellants, barebacked, bleeding, chanting in low monotone, dragging a wooden effigy of the Emperor carved from scavenged plasteel. Each strike of their whips sprayed arcs of blood across the walls. The scent made Cade's stomach twist. "Madmen," he whispered. But a small voice inside him wondered if maybe they were the only sane ones left. He reached the marker district, where bounty hunters, smugglers, and gene hackers shared the same air and the same cheap alcohol. Neon sigils buzzed weakly, marking dens of sin, trade, and death. And the old Mechanicus temples had long been stripped bare, repurposed into storage for black market augmetics. Cade found his gear locker where he had left it, a reinforced case behind a cracked shrine to St. Drusus. Inside was his rifle, a modified lascarbine with a silencer coil and custom optics. The butt plate still bore the mark of his old regiment, the 113th Vraxian Raiders, long since wiped out in the Tranche campaign. He touched the symbol once, more out of habit than reverence. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, fastened his cloak, and slipped the side tracker onto his wrist. The device emitted a faint pulse, a signal that would grow stronger as he approached his target. The hunt had begun. The lower hive was worse than he remembered. The air was dense enough to drink, and the light came only from flickering power conduits. People moved like shadows, thin, hollow-eyed, their skin gray from recycled air. Every second level smelled of death. Cade followed the tracker through corridors choked with pipes and dripping condensation. He moved past groups of children, huddled around burning waste barrels, past a servitor preacher reciting psalms with half its skull missing. The signal pulsed stronger as he reached the underbelly. Sector 9. He paused before entering. The last Arbit's squad that came here hadn't come back. Inside, silence ruled. The walls were lined with graffiti scrawled in blood and oil. "The Emperor's eyes are closed." Something moved ahead. He raised his rifle, the red targeting rune glowing faintly through the haze. A whisper echoed from deeper in the dark, soft, trembling, like someone praying. He crept closer. The corridor opened into a ruined chapel, its ceiling half-collapsed, candles flickering weakly among the rubble. And there, kneeling before a shattered icon of the Emperor, was the girl from the data slate. Her hands were clasped tight. She was whispering words too quiet to make out. Cade leveled the rifle, finger brushing the trigger. But then she turned, and the light caught her eyes. They weren't the eyes of a witch. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. "You're not supposed to be here," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost resigned. "Neither are you," Cade replied. "I didn't run from them," she said, shaking her head. "They ran from me." A tremor passed through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere far below, something massive stirred, a sound like the breath of the hive itself. Cade tightened his grip. "We're leaving. Now." "You don't understand," she whispered. "They're coming. They know where I am. You were supposed to find me." His pulse quickened. "Yeah," he said, half smirking. "That's the job." She looked straight at him, eyes glowing faintly now. "No. You're the one they sent to die." And before he could respond, the world exploded in light. When Cade came to, the air was burning. The world tilted sideways in his vision. A haze of red light, falling ash, and the sound of steel shrieking against stone. His head throbbed like a pulse of thunder trapped inside his skull. The chapel around him had collapsed into chaos. The statue of the Emperor lay split down the middle, its stone face cracked into something that looked like a sneer. And standing in the center of it all, untouched, was the psyker. Her bare feet hovered an inch above the floor. Her eyes were two suns of pale gold, bright enough to throw his shadow against the wall. Candles melted in waves around her. Every piece of debris that should have fallen simply hung mid-air, trembling as if waiting for her permission to land. Cade forced himself to move. His hand found the rifle by instinct, though his muscles screamed in protest. "Stop!" he rasped, raising the weapon. "Don't move." Her gaze flicked to him. For a second, the light faltered, and everything dropped. The sound hit all at once, a deafening collapse of glass and stone. Dust filled the room like fog. She stumbled, breathing hard, the glow fading from her eyes. Cade approached slowly, rifle still aimed, but finger trembling on the trigger. She looked younger up close. Fragile, malnourished, wrapped in a torn cloak too large for her frame. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "You just brought a ceiling down on my head," Cade said. "Forgive me if I'm not feeling sympathetic. It wasn't you I was trying to stop." She turned her head toward the corridor. From somewhere in the dark, a mechanical whine rose, high, sharp, growing louder. Cade recognized it instantly. Servo skulls, dozens of them. "Emperor's bones," he muttered. The first skull came into view, an ancient machine, half flesh and wire, its optics burning crimson. It projected a beam of red light that swept across the ruins like a predator sniffing the air. Behind it came more, their vox grills whispering litanies of arrest. "Subject located. Deploy containment protocols." The psyker flinched, clutching her head. "They're screaming," she gasped. "I can hear their orders. They think you're with me." "Not for long," Cade growled. He fired 3 precise shots. The first skull exploded in a burst of static. The second veered off-course trailing smoke. The third slammed into the wall and shattered. But there were more, far more, pouring through the archways like a swarm of metal insects. "Move," he shouted, grabbing her by the arm. She stumbled as he dragged her through the chapel's side door, down a narrow maintenance tunnel lined with flickering lumen strips. The skulls followed, their lasers cutting lines across the walls. Sparks flew as metal met stone. They ran blind through twisting corridors until the noise faded into echo. When they finally stopped, Cade collapsed against a rusted pillar, chest heaving. The psyker knelt beside him, her breathing shallow. "You could have left me," she said. "I almost did." "Then why didn't you?" Cade stared at the wall opposite them. A rusted relief of the Imperial Aquila, its wings corroded, its twin heads barely visible. "Because 50,000 thrones doesn't mean much if you're dead before you spend it," he said. "And those skulls weren't arbits. That was Inquisition tech. I've seen it before." Her eyes widened. "Then you know what they'll do if they find us." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know." They moved through the underhive for hours, guided only by the faint pulse of emergency lighting. The psyker, she hadn't given her name yet, walked barefoot without complaint, her eyes darting constantly to the shadows. "You've been here long?" Cade asked eventually. She hesitated. "Long enough to know this place doesn't forget," she said softly. "Every scream that's ever echoed here still lives in the walls." "That's poetic," Cade muttered, "and deeply unsettling." "I can hear them," she said. "Voices, all the ones they sent down here to die." Cade glanced at her sidelong. "Voices in your head, huh? That doesn't help your case." "I'm not mad," she said sharply. "They talk because no one else will. Because the Emperor doesn't answer them anymore." He stopped walking. "Careful what you say down here. Blasphemy gets you burned faster than witchcraft." She turned to face him, her expression suddenly fierce. "Do you really believe he's listening? That he sees any of this?" She gestured around, to the broken pipes, the filth, the endless hum of decay. The Imperium built its faith on silence. Cade stared at her for a moment, then looked away. "Belief's not my problem," he said. "Getting paid is." They continued in silence until they reached a ventilation shaft that led upward. Cade pried open the grate with his knife, motioning for her to climb. "What's your name?" he asked as she pulled herself into the duct. She hesitated before answering. "Alara." "All right, Alara," he said. "If you want to live through this, you listen to me. Don't use your powers unless I say so. You light up again like you did back there, and every augur on this level will pick you up in seconds." She nodded, eyes downcast. "You don't have to trust me," she murmured. "But you should believe me when I say, and they're not after me." "Then who?" "You." Cade froze. "That's cute," he said flatly. "You'll have to do better than that." "I saw it," she said. "Before they took me. Before they burned my mind open. There's something in you they want." Cade laughed without humor. "The only thing in me is regret and cheap liquor." But her expression didn't change. "It's already begun," she whispered. "You've felt it, haven't you? The dreams, the voices." Cade said nothing, because she was right. For weeks now, he'd been waking to the sound of whispers. Too faint to understand, too persistent to ignore. He'd chalked it up to exhaustion, guilt, maybe just the hive getting under his skin. But hearing it from her, it stirred something cold in his chest. He forced a smirk. "I think you've spent too long listening to ghosts." "Maybe," she said, "but ghosts don't bleed. You do." They reached the surface of the mid-hive near dawn, if you could call it that. Light didn't exist this deep. Just a dull glow that filtered down from broken skylights a mile above. The streets were crowded with scavengers and pilgrims, all wrapped in the same ragged faith. Cade pulled up his hood. "We'll lay low in the old refinery quarter," he said. "Plenty of noise, plenty of places to hide." But even as he spoke, his tracker began to pulse again. Not red, but blue. "What is that?" Alara asked. Cade frowned. "It's not supposed to do that." A static crackle echoed from the device. Then a voice, low and distorted. "Cade Vorn. Authorization confirmed. Stand by for retrieval." His blood ran cold. Alara grabbed his arm. "They found us. Impossible. I jammed the beacon." "Then maybe it's not tracking me," she said. And that's when he saw them. Figures emerging from the smog, their armor marked with the sigil of the Inquisition. Their weapons glowed faintly with sanctified runes. "By order of the Emperor," one called out through his vox mask. "You are both under arrest." Alara's hand trembled. "Don't let them take me." Cade stared at her, torn between duty and instinct. 50,000 thrones, a clean exit, or whatever madness this girl carried in her eyes. The inquisitorial agents raised their weapons. "Surrender or be purged," Cade's jaw clenched. "You picked the wrong hunter," he said. He opened fire. The refinery quarter breathed like a diseased lung, coughing fire through a forest of promethium stacks and skeletal conveyors that clattered without rest. Heat moved in waves you could lean against. Every surface sweated oil. Every shadow smelled of rust and old blood. Cade sprinted into that furnace with Alara at his shoulder, the Inquisition closing like a storm. The first agents came at them in a wedge, visors blank, tabards inked with a stylized eye split by a skull. Their formation was clean, practiced, the kind born inside drill halls where doubt is beaten out and replaced with ritual. Cade dropped to one knee at the lip of a gantry and walked the last sights across their chests. The first trigger pull split a seal. The second dropped a kneecap. The third punched a rune-lit scope and turned a sanctified helm into slag. The others barely slowed. Sanctity was just another kind of armor. It didn't make you immortal, only stubborn. "Left," he snapped, grabbing Alara and dragging her into a maze of service ladders that clung to a tower like a web spun by a mad machine. Rounds chewed into the rail, coughing sparks into their faces. He tasted burnt metal and old copper on his tongue, swallowed, kept moving. "They're not trying to kill you," Alara gasped, half climbing, half falling. "They're hurting you." "I noticed," he said, and shouldered the hatch at the first landing. It screamed on rust-choked hinges and gave them a corridor of red light and sweating pipes. Question is, toward what? The answer was waiting in the howl that rose beneath them, a choir of disciplined boots and disciplined breath. Cade smelled incense in the heat, purity seals singeing where they'd been glued to armor plates. He dragged Alara through a door marked with a blotched aquila, and kicked them into an inspection gantry that circled a vat the size of a hab block. A heat haze wavered over its surface. Promethium rolled inside like a sleeping sea. Across the way, more agents ghosted out of the smog. Their weapons weren't guard issue. The stocks were wrapped in scripture and bone, heat shields etched with hexagrams. Witch killers. Cade spat a curse that felt like a prayer. "Hands where we can see them," a Vox voice called, steady as a metronome. "Cade Vorn, lay down your weapon. Subject Epsilon 31 Theta. Prostrate yourself and accept benediction." "That's a new word for it," Cade muttered. "Benediction means the same thing everywhere in the Imperium," Alara whispered. "An ending." He slung the rifle, hauled her along the rail. The gantry flexed under their weight, bolts squealing. A round rang off the handrail, another snapped a rung an inch from his boot. He dropped flat and returned fire in short, precise coughs, never more than 2 shots per target. He wasn't trying to kill them all. He was trying to buy seconds, the only currency the hunted can count. The gantry ended in a maintenance cradle, hooks, chains, a rust-stained pulley frame. Cade smashed a lock with the butt of his rifle and dragged a chain free, then clipped it to Alara's wrist shackle with a practiced twist. "Don't fight," he said. "It'll hold your weight." Her mouth opened on protest, then closed when she saw the angle he'd chosen, a drop to a lower catwalk that ran beneath the vat. The space between was a cathedral of heat and vapor. "If I miss, you won't," he shoved. She fell like a prayer tossed into a dark well, the chain singing through the pulley until it hit the end stop with a jerk that stole his breath. She swung, hit the far rail with a grunt, and clung. Cade braced, fired again to keep the agents honest, then seized the chain and leapt. For a heartbeat he hung between heat and void. The refinery's breath licked his face. Then steel met glove and he slammed shoulder first into the lower rail beside Alara. Pain flared. He used it like a handhold and hauled them both onto the catwalk. Down, he said, and they ran beneath the vat, passing through drifts of vapor that smelled like a shrine on fire. Somewhere above, an alarm began to toll, a deep ship's bell sound that made the rail vibrate against his palm. We're boxed, he said, mind already sketching routes. They've got the doors. They'll take the vents next. Alara's eyes unfocused for a second, then snapped back like a lens finding the world again. 2 squads cutting us off ahead, 3 behind, 1 above. There's something else with them. You see that? I hear it. In their heads. In their orders. She swallowed. It's cold when it thinks. Great. He skidded to a halt at a junction where 3 catwalks met like crossed blades. One arm led into a tunnel of ribbed conduit, another into a forest of pipes stitched with warning sigils. The third ended at a heavy door stenciled with a Mechanicus skull cog and a sigil that meant, keep out or be sanctified into parts. Maglev maintenance, Cade said. If we can reach the subspine, we can ride it out beyond the patrol cordon. Before Alara could answer, Vox chant hammered the air. Runes flared along the rail like 6 stars. The corridor ahead filled with sanctified smoke. Then the inquisitorial wedge came through it. Helms bowed as if in prayer, muzzles level like accusation. Behind them moved something taller, robed in flayed red and steel, servo arms whispering benedictions of oil. A skull face turned, optics burning with a machine's patient hate. Eliminate the mortal contractor. The robed thing intoned in a voice that sounded like a cathedral falling. Secure the witch, Cade moved first. There was no cover worth the name, only motion and angles. He took the angle. The first volleys skated off the rail inches from his hip. He fired back, not to stop them. Nothing stopped that sort of faith, but to stagger their rhythm, to make men hesitate in the space where training ends and dying begins. Ilara ducked behind a brace and pressed her palms to the floor grating, eyes shut. The air trembled. A ripple of pressure rolled out from her, and the smoke drew a sharp breath inward. For a heartbeat, all the brass in the world sang one organ note, and the machine priest's servo arms shuddered. The agents didn't. They'd trained with pain. They'd trained with demons. A ripple was only a reminder that faith had a weight you could heft. On me, Cade said, and heaved the maintenance door. Something in the lock protested, and then the Mechanicus seal cracked with an ugly sound. Inside was a spine of black iron that ran away into infinity. A mag rail like a blade held inside a throat. Service plinths dotted the verge, each with a standing cradle where a worker once clipped in to polish or pray. Wind lived here, the kind born from speed remembered. It tasted dry and old. Clip, Cade said, and slotted Alara into a cradle with hands that were quicker than thought. He hooked himself into the next one, fingers finding the manual throttle hidden beneath a plate. This is going to hurt. It already hurts, she whispered. He yanked. The cradle bucked, then screamed forward, mag rollers spitting sparks that tore the dark. Behind, the door jumped in its frame as rounds hit. Ahead, the rail became a river. For 5 breaths there was only speed, the wash of stale air, the chuff of rollers, the thud of his heart counting the seconds he'd bought. Then rune light bloomed along the walls, and a kill bar descended with a grinding of sanctified gears. Cade threw the carriage into a slide, and the world became a spin of red and black. Metal screamed. The kill bar missed his skull by a thumb's width, and shaved a bright line along the cradle's back. He laughed, not from joy, but from the old animal fact of still being a body. Behind them, a second carriage howled. The Inquisition rode in silence, helms reflectionless. Cade saw his own face in a visor for a fraction of a heartbeat. Stubbled, ash-streaked, eyes too old for the skin around them, and looked away. He braced, waited for a shot he knew was coming. It came, and the cradle shuddered as the rail spat blue flame where a round hit too close to the coils. "Can you?" he began. "Not here," Alara said through clenched teeth. "Too much metal. It sings. It drowns me. Then we bleed speed." He hit the brake in a series of sharp stabs that turned momentum into heat. The inquisitorial carriage surged, then overcorrected, clipping a maintenance ladder with a shriek that made his teeth ache. A robed figure toppled into the dark and was gone before Faith could catch him. The others adjusted. They were very good. The rail spat them into a junction where the mag spine bifurcated. Cade took the left blindly, and the carriage flung itself through a mouth of stone teeth into a cavern whose roof vanished in the smog above. The sound changed. He smelled brine and old cold. "The sump. You wanted out," Cade said. "Welcome to the bottom." The carriage lost power in a shower of sparks. They coasted onto a service platform stitched with prayer tags, then rattled to a stop. Silence fell in a rush that left his ears ringing. Somewhere below, water, or what passed for it, slapped against stone in slow, patient applause. Alara unhooked with shaking hands. They followed. I know. He drew a lungful of air that tasted like regret and damp iron. We make them pay for every step. He took stock because stock-taking kept your hands from shaking. 1 mug charge left for the rifle's capacitor, a half-clip for the auto-pistol, a knife that remembered better wars, 2 smoke beads, 1 faithless heart, and 1 girl whose eyes held too much sky for a world that lived underground. The agents ghosted into view along the opposite rail, weapons held polite and ready, as if a sermon had reached a particularly watchful passage. Their leader raised a hand and the others waited. Cade felt the old itch in his trigger finger, the urge to take the first shot, to write the first sentence of a conversation with blood, and held it there, savoring the control. Contractor, the Vox said, you've acted beyond remit. Stand down. They made me listen for what shouldn't have been there. Alara's voice trembled as they crouched beneath the heat pipes, their breath fogging in the cold condensation that dripped from corroded steel. Her pupils had dilated until her eyes looked like black glass, reflecting Cade's flickering lumen. When they put the psyamp on my skull, she continued, I heard the Astronomicon, but it wasn't light. It was screaming, billions of voices praying at once, all funneled toward a dead sun. And somewhere inside that noise, one voice whispered back. Cade didn't speak. He'd seen the results of psychic experiments. Minds turned inside out, eyes burned to ash, skulls ruptured by the Emperor's own radiance. The idea of a whisper from the Astronomicon, the Emperor's beacon, was heresy deep enough to get entire hives sterilized. What did it say? He finally asked. Alara looked at him, lips trembling. It said your name. Cade's hand froze on the grip of his last pistol. That's a neat trick, he said carefully. They teach you that in the Scholastica Psychana? I'm not lying, she insisted. When I escaped, I thought it was in my head, but then the dream started. The black corridors, the sound of machinery breathing, and a man's voice calling out for help. Your voice, he laughed, a dry, broken sound that didn't reach his eyes. You've got the wrong man. I'm nobody, a hunter, a failed soldier. No, she said softly. You're marked. She reached toward him before he could react, her fingers brushing the side of his neck, and the world collapsed. Cade gasped. He wasn't in the hive anymore. He stood in a cathedral made of bone, its ceiling arched with the ribs of giants. The air shimmered with light that wasn't light, a golden storm pulsing in every direction. And there, at the center of it, rose the throne, not the one from frescoes or propaganda vids. This one was alive. Cables as thick as arteries pulsed with molten light. Tubes ran from the throne into a figure seated upon it, skeletal, burning, unending. A halo of machinery devoured what was once a man. The figure's eyes flickered, dead but aware. Then came the voice, not from the figure, but from somewhere beneath it. Deep, guttural, layered like metal grinding over bone. Cade Vorn. He spun, but there was nothing behind him. The voice surrounded him. You were made to hunt, but you are also the hunted. The Imperium feeds itself on men like you. Blood for obedience. Obedience for silence. What are you? Cade shouted. I am what remains when faith forgets itself. The throne cracked like ice. A wave of golden fire rushed outward, and Cade saw faces in it. Billions of souls screaming upward through a light that ate them whole. Their cries became hymns, their flesh became energy, and beneath all of it he saw a shape crawling within the light. Something vast, imprisoned, gnawing at its own chains. He fell. Cade! Alara's voice ripped him back into his body. He gasped, clutching his throat, the echo of that impossible light still burning behind his eyes. The tunnel spun, the air thick and heavy. What? What did you show me? He demanded. I didn't show you anything, she said, pale and shaking. You pulled me in. That's what they wanted to test. You can reach through the veil without trying. Reach through? Cade spat. You mean whatever that thing was? It's not a thing, she said. It's alive. The Emperor's body is on the throne, but something else is inside it. Something that remembers being human and hates what he became. Cade's skin crawled. You're talking blasphemy. I'm talking truth, she whispered. And the Inquisition knows. That's why they want us. You heard it too. It spoke to you. Cade paced, heart pounding. I don't care what it said. I'm done. We find a ship, get off this rock, and let the ecclesiarchy burn itself. It won't let you leave, she said. The mark's inside you now. You've heard the whisper. That's the first step. First step to what? To becoming the next vessel. He froze. Explain. When the throne fails, Alara said, her eyes glistening with fear, the light must find another host. The Emperor's divinity needs flesh to survive. They've been looking for one who can hear the whisper and survive it. That's why the Inquisition made you a hunter. So you'd walk willingly to them when they called. Cade backed away, shaking his head. No, I was recruited. I took contracts. I chose this life. Did you? She asked. Or did they guide you here piece by piece? Every kill, every bounty, every dream, all leading you back to the throne? The air grew cold. Somewhere deep in the pipes, a low metallic moan rolled like distant thunder. They're close, Alara said, gripping his arm. The whispers waking them. They can feel you now. Cade raised his rifle. Then we move. The corridor ahead split into a maze of maintenance shafts. Cade led, his movements mechanical now, instinct drowning out thought. They descended into a lower sector, abandoned even by scavengers. Fungal lights grew from cracks in the walls, casting everything in a sickly green glow. Alara stumbled but kept close. The psychic hum in the air was stronger now. A faint vibration beneath their feet, as if the hive itself was whispering through the steel. What happens if they catch me? Cade asked suddenly. They'll take you to Terra, Alara said, to the Golden Throne itself, and they'll put you inside. Then we die here, he said flatly. At that moment, a metallic clang echoed ahead. Boots. Not gang scum this time. Too precise. Cade cut the lumen and pulled Alara into a side alcove. 4 figures emerged from the fog, their armor black and marked with the sigil of the Inquisition. But these were not the same soldiers. They moved slower, heavier, as if their limbs weren't entirely flesh. Their faces were hidden behind silver masks etched with prayers. Servo tethers ran from their spines into floating sensors that spilled black smoke. Throne proxies, Alara whispered. They aren't alive. The lead figure spoke in a voice that was a dozen voices layered together. The mark has awakened. The next vessel walks among us. Purge the shell. Preserve the soul. Cade squeezed the trigger. The first proxy's chest exploded in a shower of molten circuitry, but it didn't fall. It reassembled, the flesh knitting like wax. Alara screamed. Run! They tore down the corridor as the proxies advanced, each step bending the floor like it hated to hold their weight. Behind them, the hive itself began to quake. Distant claxons blared. The golden whisper, the same voice Cade had heard beneath the throne, returned, echoing through his skull like molten steel. You cannot run from what you are. Cade stumbled, clutching his head. Blood leaked from his nose. Alara dragged him onward. Fight it! She shouted. It feeds on surrender. He growled, forcing one foot ahead of the other. The corridor opened into a hollow cavern, a forgotten Mechanicus reactor room. A dead god of machines slumped in the center, its once glorious cog sigil half buried in rust. Here, Cade said, bracing himself against a control plinth. We make our stand. Alara shook her head. You don't understand. It's not coming for you from outside. It's already inside. The voice inside Cade's skull grew louder, deeper, like a tide pulling him under. Open your eyes, Cade Vorn. You have hunted in my name for years. Every soul you claimed fed my flame. You are already part of me, he screamed, firing blindly into the dark. Each shot echoing off the reactor walls until the chamber felt like it was collapsing in on itself. Alara reached for him, her voice breaking. You have to choose, kill me or become him. Cade turned toward her, his rifle trembling. Light, golden and burning, poured from his eyes. She whispered through tears, Don't let it win. Chapter 5. The Flesh of the Machine. The first breath he took wasn't air. It was heat dragged over raw iron, a furnace lung refusing to cool. Light crept along the seams of his vision in sharp golden filaments, stitching the dark to him as if the reactor hall had decided he belonged to it. Alara's palm was on his cheek, small and desperate, her fingers shaking as if they clutched a wire with current running through it. The proxies stepped with a choir's patience, masks expressionless, sensor smoke folding and refolding the room into ritual. Cade put the rifle to his own temple because the straight line between problem and solution had always been the only line he trusted. The trigger met the pad of his finger like an old friend who had come to collect a debt. The whisper inside his skull smiled without a mouth and leaned closer. Not yet, Cade Vorn. The shot went wide. He hadn't missed. The muzzle had turned. A small correction, a small theft. The round tore a bright seam along a rust-frilled pillar and set a banner of prayer tags alight. The smell of burning parchment lifted, sweet and ugly, and the censer smoke drank it the way faithful drink wine. Alara's breath hitched. Look at me, she said, the words hoarse but steady. You are here. You are not a throne. You are not a vessel. You are you. Names don't hold, he said through a laugh that wasn't laughter. Names are wax in heat. Then use pain, she said, and took his wrist and pressed the rim of the rifle's hot barrel into the soft inside of his forearm until it hissed. The pain was clean, bright as a cut. The light behind his eyes fluttered. For a heartbeat, he was only a man standing beside a dead machine, skin scalded, breath shaking, cataloging the distances to 3 exits he couldn't reach. The proxies advanced. The machine priest among them raised a palm inscribed with a cog rune. His voice boomed without echo, as if the room were swallowing its own history to hear him better. Subject Epsilon 31 Theta is property of the Ordo Hereticus. Contractor Cade Vorn is an expendable conduit. Do not damage the soul. Cade grinned because a grin was still something he could own. Come and take it, he said, and the grin felt like a blade held behind teeth. He shot the nearest sensor. Sanctified smoke coughed fire, then choked itself into black. The proxy stumbled, composure cracking like glaze under heat. Alara flung out a hand, not in a gesture of power but of balance, as if steadying a table before the plates slid. The light around her fingers didn't blaze this time. It pulsed once. A low bell struck with a gloved hand, and the sensor fell silent. Left, she whispered. There's a maintenance gantry behind the coolant stacks. If we reach it, I can drown the voices under the machine hum. Music to my ears, he said, and dragged her across a floor that remembered wars. Boots striking a cadence that used to mean discipline, and now meant refusal. Rounds hit the plinth beside his head and kicked stone dust into his mouth. It tasted like bone. The gantry presented itself as a rib of corroded iron stitched to a wall of pipework. They climbed. The rail flexed, protesting, a metal groan like a catechism misspoken. Below, the proxies did not hurry. Their patience was a net they believed would always be big enough. Cade, Alara said, voice close to his neck. The reactor heart. They never took it fully offline. I can hear it. It's breathing under the rust. Can you talk to it? I can listen, she said, and the honesty of it made something inside him want to bow. They reached a narrow gallery that circled a tower of glassy armor plating veined with calcified sealant. Beneath the cloudy skin, dark shapes turned like the last thoughts of a dying god. Cade planted his back against a valve box the size of a coffin, and reloaded by feel. The movement steadied him. Rituals were anchors if you chose the right sea. The light touched him again. Not an assault, an appraisal, an old proprietor counting familiar rooms. The voice that lived with it wasn't loud now. It didn't need to be open, Cade. You have been opening all your life. Every door you kicked in was practice. Every target you marked, every breath you took while you watched a man decide if he wanted to live badly or die quickly. You were a hinge long before I found you. He spat bile and blood at the idea. Find someone with a better line, he said aloud, because talking back kept the thoughts from drying into acceptance. Who are you talking to? Alara's words were a strain. A debt collector, he said, and pushed her toward a junction box whose faceplate hung by one screw. Can you black out this room without cooking us? Maybe a stutter, enough to make them blind for a breath. Her fingers hovered over the tangle of cable and prayer twine within, then settled with the instinct of someone aligning knives in the dark. She closed her eyes. Cover me! He stepped out along the curve of the gallery. The proxies below tracked him with the patience of men trying not to notice their own fear. He put shots where they had to move to avoid them, letting movement be the enemy. One mask cracked. A hand lost 2 fingers and didn't bleed. The machine priest raised a litany of countermeasure, and the room's temperature dropped a notch as if the prayer robbed heat to pay attention. Alara hissed through her teeth. Light bled from under her eyelids. Her lips moved, not in words Cade knew, but in cadence he recognized. The rhythm of a system talking about itself. The reactor answered. The tiles beneath his boots vibrated with an old song, and half the lumen strips in the hall died with a damp click, as if a wet mouth had closed on them. For one breath, the proxies were shadows. For one breath, the masks were only masks, not faces. For one breath, Cade remembered a trench on Vrax when the mortar smoke turned midday into night, and every man on both sides had to become a sound to stay alive. He moved, because moving was a sound too. The first proxy reached his level with a climbing machine's steadiness. Cade let it grab the rail. He met its wrist with his knife. The blade wasn't special. It was steel sharpened by need, honed by boredom, kept clean by a superstition that turned out to be discipline. It found the seam between plates and asked a question with the point. The answer was a shriek of binary and something that tried to be a human exhale. The proxy fell, its hands making a mute clatter on the way down. The lights flared back. The machine priest flicked a sliver of cog-blessed metal, and somewhere inside the wall a breaker obeyed a prayer better than it would have obeyed a manual. The hall came alive again, brighter, angrier. Alara sagged and caught herself on the edge of the junction box. "They can see," she said, apologetic because she had wanted to save him more than a breath. "That breath was a life," he said, and meant it. Her mouth pressed to a firm line the way a hand becomes a fist. The proxies gathered. The machine priest raised both arms, and the sensor smoke braided into lines and sigils that burned the air where they crossed. The patterns felt like thought, made geometry. Like a cage hanging in space that you could only see if you had already agreed to enter. Cade felt a pressure against his sternum as if fingers made of doctrine were pressing him backward toward an answer prepared in advance. "Don't look at it," Alara said, pulling at his sleeve. "If you look, it names you. And if it names you, you belong," he finished, and picked a different horizon. The valve box at his back hummed, a small constant, a machine idea that didn't need men to believe in it to work. The contrast made him laugh again, and this time the sound had edges he could pick up and use. He put 3 rounds through the sensor cords. Smoke fell, then surged up again, then tangled, then turned dumb. The geometry hiccuped. Men below corrected with the same grim competence that had brought them this far into a hive that wanted to eat them. Cade accepted the lesson. Never believe one cut ends as not, and made a second. Alara tore a strip from her cloak and bound the blister on his forearm with fingers that were more careful than his. "Deserve counted for. They won't stop," she said. "Even if we kill these, more will come. The mark is loud now. Even I can hear it without trying." "I've been loud my whole life," he said. "Just never had someone important listening." "Don't flatter the monster," she said, and a tired smile lived for a heartbeat at the corner of her mouth. The machine priest intoned a new hymn. It wasn't pretty. It was a long subtraction sung until there was no remainder. The floor under the gallery clicked as locks engaged that had been content for centuries to be forgotten. Cade felt the steel shift like a back with a burden repositioned. "They're going to cut this level," he said. "Drop us into the sump or set us adrift until a load crane remembers to care." "Then we move while the bolts turn," Alara said. And they went, the gallery curving them toward a door whose window had been painted black, and then scratched clear again by a hand that needed to see stars in a room that never had any. Behind the door lay a service chapel to the machine spirit of the reactor. It had been built by men who believed that even metal desired comfort if you gave it candles and hymns. The pews were pipes. The altar was a control console under a cloth. There were offerings on the sill. Bolts polished to mirror. A child's copper tooth. A fingernail grimed with oil and reverence. Cade shut the door and found the bar still slid true. He set it and turned to the console. "Can you talk it into a second stutter?" he asked. Alara's eyes were already on the bank of gauges, the old paper dials where needles slept against zero like knives laid down after a fight. "I can ask it to remember a rhythm it liked better," she said, which was the same thing as a prayer if you said it with the right mouth. The wind that met them in the upper hive carried no scent of mercy. It was a manufactured wind, born from turbines that spun to keep men believing the air above was different from the air below. Cade had been in hives his entire life, and he knew that difference was a lie. The upper tiers just buried their dead behind cleaner doors. He leaned against a rust-flaked support beam, catching his breath. Alara knelt beside him, her eyes unfocused, palms pressed against the floor as though listening to the hive's pulse. The mark beneath Cade's sternum burned like a coal fed with slow air. He felt the Emperor's whisper crawling through the ribs of the world, searching for him, patient as faith. "They know we're still alive," she said softly. "The proxies talk to the shrine towers. Every auspex in this sector is listening for your heartbeat." "Good," he said, checking the rifle's mag. "Let them find it. I've got enough left in me to make them regret the price." "That's not bravery," she said. "That's despair pretending it's useful." He glanced at her, and for a moment he wasn't sure if she pitied him or envied how simple his choices were. "You told me the light wants a body," he said. "Fine, but it's going to have to drag mine kicking and screaming into the throne." The hive above them shuddered with the passing of a tram, a sound like the breath of a sleeping god. Cade scanned the skyline through a slit of fractured glass. The towers of the ecclesiarchy dominated everything, spires of black basalt carved with a billion prayers, each one a blade against the stars. "That's where they'll go next," Alara whispered. "They'll take the word to the priests. Tell them the Emperor's flame flickered. They'll hide it behind liturgies until everyone forgets." "Then we don't give them the chance," Cade said. "We go there first," Alara's head snapped up. That's suicide. Probably, he said and smiled faintly. But it's the first plan I've had all day that sounds like me. They moved through the upper vents beneath the shrine quarter, crawling between ducts where incense and steam made the air taste like burnt copper and prayers half-finished. The walls were lined with servitor husks that whispered the same benediction over and over. The flesh is weak. The Emperor endures. Cade had heard that litany since childhood, but now the words bent differently in his skull. He could almost feel the machinery humming beneath the syllables, the promise that one day even faith would be automated. They stopped at a maintenance grate overlooking the Cathedral of St. Velathrix. Its stained glass was gone, replaced with adamantine ribs to keep the poor from breaking in. Pilgrims shuffled below like ants caught in ritual, each clutching a votive flame that flickered green in the recycled air. Alara touched his arm. The Inquisition won't strike here, not in sight of the altar. Then they'll wait for us to step into it, he said, which is exactly what we'll do. He dropped first, landing between two statues whose faces had been worn down by centuries of smoke. The cathedral floor was slick with the wax of 10,000 candles. A preacher's voice rolled across the hall, rising over the droning choir. Faith is a chain, brothers. The weight of it proves its strength. Bend your knees and know that your suffering keeps the galaxy pure. The crowd responded as one, the sound a wave of obedience. Cade had fought heretics who screamed less fervently. He pulled Alara toward the side aisle, their footsteps muffled by ash. They passed shrines built from scavenged machine parts. Old bolter casings, a cracked lens from a land raider, a servitor's ribcage repurposed into a reliquary. Even holiness, he thought, had to be recycled here. At the heart of the cathedral, the pulpit stood beneath a hanging symbol of the Imperial Aquila, a metal effigy that dripped oil like blood. The preacher was no man. His flesh had long since been sanctified into wire and bone. Lenses glowed in empty sockets. His arms ended in censers that spilled smoke heavy with burning myrrh and sanctified oil. Alara froze. That's not just a priest, she whispered. That's a Lex Mechanist. Cade raised an eyebrow. Meaning? He's wired directly into the shrine's vox. Every sermon he speaks, the whole quarter hears. He's part of the hive now. Cade's grip tightened on his rifle. Then we make him say something worth hearing. They waited for the sermon to crest. Then Cade fired a single round into the dome above the pulpit. The sound shattered the choir's drone like glass. The congregation screamed, scattering into aisles. Cade vaulted the rail and leveled the rifle at the mechanist's chest. Broadcast this, he said. The priest turned, his mechanical face expressionless, voice hissing through a grill. You defile a holy place, child of ash. Do you know the punishment for heresy beneath the Emperor's eyes? Yeah, Cade said, living in his empire. He fired into the vox relay behind the pulpit. Sparks rained down like artificial stars. The voice of the priest crackled, then cut through the static, distorted, amplified, spreading through every lumen in the district. The throne bleeds, it boomed. The flame falters, the Emperor hungers for flesh. The cathedral fell silent. Every head turned. Pilgrims froze mid-prayer. Even the candles seemed to hesitate in their burning. Cade had expected panic. Instead, he saw hunger. Faces lit with the kind of faith that loves apocalypse more than peace. Alara whispered, horrified. You've just given them prophecy. Cade turned to her. And maybe prophecy is what we need. A truth too loud to bury. The priest twitched, gears grinding in protest. Blasphemy will be repaid in iron, he rasped. The Inquisition comes for you. They already have, Cade said. And I'm still here. He turned to the crowd. You think you suffer for the Emperor? You think he needs your blood to keep the light burning? Look around you. You're the fuel. Every one of you. You kneel, you starve, you die. And somewhere on Terra a corpse burns because you keep feeding it. A woman in the front row began to weep. A man shouted a prayer that sounded more like a curse. The crowd began to split, half clutching their icons tighter, half stepping forward in something dangerously like hope. Then the doors blew open. The Inquisition entered like judgment given flesh. 10 proxies marched in lockstep, weapons raised, masks glimmering with the reflection of sacred fire. Behind them came the masked figure, the same voice that had hunted Cade through the lower hives. The congregation dropped to their knees, mistaking the intruders for angels. Alara grabbed Cade's hand. We can't fight them here. Not in front of this many people. He hesitated. We started this fire. We can't leave it to burn without us. She looked at him. Really looked. And in that second, he saw the part of her that had stopped running the day they met. Then give them a reason to believe in something that isn't a corpse. Cade raised his rifle again, not at the Inquisitors, not at the crowd, but at the massive Aquila hanging above the altar. "For the Emperor," he said dryly, and pulled the trigger. The symbol exploded into a storm of molten metal and flame. Pilgrims screamed. Proxies opened fire. The cathedral became a hymn of light and ruin. Cade tackled Alara behind the pulpit as las bolts scorched the air overhead. The masked Inquisitor's voice carried even through the chaos. "You cannot kill faith, Cade Vorn. You can only feed it." Cade chambered another round, teeth clenched. "Then let's see how hungry it really is." The next shot struck the base of the pulpit. The floor buckled, and the entire dais collapsed into the maintenance catacombs below. Cade and Alara fell with it, swallowed by smoke and gravity as the cathedral above dissolved into prayer and fire. They landed hard in the dark beneath the world's faith. Pipes moaned. Somewhere far above, the Emperor's name was still being shouted, but down here, it was only echo. Alara groaned. "Tell me that was part of your plan." "It's all part of my plan," he said, spitting blood. "I just haven't written the ending yet." In the distance, light flickered. Blue, cold, mechanical. The lower catacombs stretched ahead like veins under the hive's skin, and in the dark something moved, whispering in a voice older than the Imperium itself. "The chains of faith break only for those who never believed." Cade raised his rifle and kept walking toward the sound. The catacombs breathed with a slow, damp patience, exhaling the chill of stone that remembered every name whispered to it. The floor was a mosaic of old repairs, plates welded over plates until the seams became a script no living scribe could read. Cade picked his way through it with the caution of a thief in a reliquary, the rifle heavy against his shoulder, the mark inside his ribs beating a rhythm the tunnels learned and repeated back to him. Alara moved at his flank with her palms grazing the walls as if steadiness could be borrowed from the hive's bones. Somewhere above, the cathedral shed fire and certainty into the night. Down here, certainty was a rumor with poor lighting. They passed ossuary alcoves where skulls were stacked in devotional geometry, each brow inked with a saint's name and a numeral denoting its usefulness. Some still wore ragged votive ribbons, others had been repurposed. Servitor optics socketed into old bone and left to blink an endless, sightless benediction. A thin thread of chanting seeped through the stone from far away. Too regular to be human, too imperfect to be machine. It made the hairs along Cade's forearms rise like pilgrims at the first toll of a shrine bell. Alara's breath shortened. "They kept them here after audits," she murmured. "Workers who died on shift. The ecclesiarchy blessed the remains. The mechanicus logged them as parts. The administratum marked them as reconciled souls." 3 empires, 1 corpse, Cade said. "Efficient," the chant swelled. It wasn't words anymore. It was texture. A rough cloth pulled over the mind, heavy with condensation and incense. When it peaked, the mark beneath Cade's sternum ached with the ache of a muscle asked to lift a weight it knew too well. Light pressed his vision from the edges, careful, curious, proprietary. He gritted his teeth and kept walking. The corridor opened into a mortuary rotunda with a sunken floor, and galleries circling down like a spiral drilled into the earth. Candles guttered in niches, their stubs welded to rails with prayers scratched into the wax with fingernails. In the center stood a font carved from the casing of a demolished reactor valve. The water inside didn't reflect. It absorbed. Alara touched the rim and flinched. "It's listening." "Let it," Cade said, and watched the black surface fail to hold his face. "Everyone else is." The whisper reached them there, clearer than it had been under the reactor, warm as iron pulled from a forge and set upon a winter anvil. It was not the Emperor's. It was the echo that followed the Emperor like a shadow. He had to drag. Enough. Cade steadied himself on the font and spoke to the rotunda because speaking directly to the voice felt like letting it choose the distance. "You keep saying that," he said. "Enough what? Enough running. Enough pretending your hands are clean when you've always loved the work that stains them. Enough doors half opened, Cade Vorn. Be what you are made for. Be useful," he laughed without humor. "Useful to whom? To the only purpose that matters." Alara stood between him and the font, as if she could body check a god. "You can't have him," she said. "Choose someone who asked to be chosen." The water in the font rose, not like a wave, like breath. A thin dark film climbed the inner wall and didn't fall back. Within its skin, shapes tried and failed to be hands. "We did not choose him. He came where all hunters come, to the place where prayers run out and work remains." The galleries stirred. Figures stepped from the shadowed arches and arranged themselves along the rail in ritual ranks. Heads bowed, hands folded around the hafts of tools. For a heartbeat, Cade thought they were penitent pilgrims. Then the lumen from his barrel kissed a face and found waxy skin pulled taut over augmetic anchor points, lips sewn at the corners to keep a loop of litany from escaping. Eye sockets filled with lenses that glowed with a relic's patience. Servitors, but not the factory drones he knew. These were dressed in torn tabards and rust-stiffened choir sashes. Each wore a flensed strip of parchment affixed to the clavicle with a brass nail. Sentence, sin, absolution. The choir of the dead. Alara's voice broke. They made a parish out of them. The nearest servitor's vox grill clicked. Static coughed, then found a key. Its mouth moved with a mortician's care. A voice unwound from inside it that was not its own. Old, tobacco-scraped, weary. Cade Vorn, his pulse spiked for all the wrong reasons. He knew that voice. It took him a second to place the man it belonged to because the mind avoids faces it killed for pay. Marshal Garin, he said, and the rotunda answered with 100 tiny sounds. Wax cracking, bolts settling, steel remembering weight. You put him in the dirt, Alara whispered. In the dirt and 3 meters of concrete, Cade said. He had it coming. The servitor inclined its head, as if the wax of its neck remembered how to bow. Everyone has it coming, Garin's voice said through the grill. That's the theology of perdition. Cade lifted the rifle. He didn't point it at the thing. He pointed it at the idea that it could speak with a dead man's mouth. You here to haunt me, Marshal? Get in line. Lines are your specialty, the voice said, patient as a rest. Boundaries, crossings, breaking and keeping, doorways. Hinges, Cade said, too fast. He almost apologized for the speed of the word. He didn't. More servitors stirred. Voices braided, coming through whichever mouth the rotunda chose. A foreman he'd bribed, a smuggler he'd betrayed, a deserter he'd collared for transport to a penal legion muster. Each name was a knot in the rope of his memory. Each knot held, Alara turned in a slow circle, eyes wide and glassy. It's channeling them through the choir. It's building a judgment. Good, Cade said, and in spite of himself the syllable had teeth. I've got statements for the record. He stepped down the first ring of the spiral. The servitors watched without watching. The font's unreflection breathed. The whisper filled the rotunda without echo. You have been an honest instrument. You do not pretend to be better than the work. That is why the door fits you. Cade stopped 2 steps above the floor and felt the old sensation come over him. The emptiness before a shot. The long, clean horizon of the act. In that space, everything was true and nothing was permanent. I know the want, he said, and took a breath that tasted of stone and expired wax. I know the hunger to be part of something bigger than the weight you can carry by yourself. The Legion taught me that. The trench taught me that. The jobs after taught me that. But you... He tapped his sternum with 2 fingers and felt the heat answer the insult. You want the part of me that believes work is its own absolution. You want to take that and run it on noble fumes until there's nothing left but light and orders. He shook his head. No, find another hinge. I'll be a lock. The font trembled as if laughter had found water. The choir didn't move. Alara's hand ghosted near his elbow without touching. Locks are already doors, the voice said, the kindness in it worse than contempt. They simply pretend the wall around them matters. We do not want your submission. We want your momentum, your stubbornness, your refusal. That belongs to me, Cade said, and the people I give it to. Alara found her voice. Then give it now, she said, and the plea in it wasn't for safety. It was for fidelity to the line he'd drawn in a room without rulers. Give it to the ones who can still hear themselves think. The servitor with Garen's voice shuddered. When it spoke again, the tone was thinner, like parchment fire catching at the edges. You remember the raid on Lift Spine 9? Cade did. He remembered the heat, the sour stink of coolant, the way gun oil turned to varnish under promethium steam. He remembered a narrow stair, and a boy with a stolen last pistol shooting wild with his eyes closed. He remembered the angle, the math, the clean answer. You killed my son, the voice said, almost curious. The mark beneath Cade's sternum flared like a fresh brand. I used to think that put me above you. Then they put me in a machine and made me sing. Now I think perhaps we work the same altar. Alara half reached again. Cade shook his head a fraction. He wanted the touch. He needed the distance. You want me to kneel, he told the font, because naming the play kept it honest. You've built a church out of my dead. The homily is mercy as obedience. The collection plate is me. The water's skin rippled. In it, forms resolved and collapsed. A rosette, a rail, a throne. The whisper warmed as if proud of a diligent pupil. We want you to stand. Kneeling is for men who need permission to be cruel. You never have. The rotunda's far arch blossomed with violet light. Alara hissed and shielded her face. Cade's eyes slid against a radiance that wasn't radiance at all. It was strain given color. Proxies marched through the glow like a prayer book thrown open to the page where the ending is already underlined. At their center walked the masked inquisitor, cloak soot dark, boots leaving no wet prints. Liturgy, the figure said mildly, taking in the font, the choir, the spiral of dead candles. I would apologize for arriving during your devotions, but I have long since learned that apologies waste air better used breathing. Cade sighted on the gap between mask and collar. You pray down here often? I prefer the upper levels, the Inquisitor said, gesturing to the servitors with the faint fondness of a teacher grading essays. But every faith needs a basement. Alara stepped to the side, angling herself between Cade and the encroaching line with the reckless neatness of someone who has decided where she belongs in the geometry of a dying room. You built this. The horizon wasn't a line, it was a wound. The ash wastes stretched in all directions, cut by the skeletons of manufactoria that had once bled smoke into the atmosphere, until the air itself forgot how to heal. The stars were hidden behind layers of carbonized sky. And beneath it all, something hummed, a low tectonic vibration, the sound of machines that had never been told to stop. Cade walked with his rifle slung low, the barrel dragging a furrow through dust fine as bone meal. The mark inside his chest pulsed faintly, quieter now, like a heart trying to remember its own rhythm after a seizure. Alara walked beside him, her hood drawn tight, the lenses of her rebreather glowing faint blue. Neither spoke. There wasn't much left to say after defying gods and ghosts. They had been walking for 3 days since leaving the hive. 3 days of sandstorms that stank of promethium and melted glass. 3 days of sleeping beneath old shuttle husks, with the sky whispering prayers it didn't believe. On the morning of the 4th, they saw fire. It was far off, beyond the cracked silhouettes of crawler husks, but it burned in slow motion, like an argument between faith and fuel. A camp, maybe a caravan. Maybe worse. Alara crouched on a ridge of slag, raising her scope. Not pilgrims, she murmured. Traders, and... Her voice thinned. Skitari, Cade joined her. Through the heat shimmer he saw them. 6 Mechanicus skirmishers, red robes snapping in the wind, augmetic limbs glinting like flensed silver. They were moving among a cluster of tents built from ship plating, collecting tithe crates. Civilians knelt before them, hands bound, faces scorched by sand. Alara's hand tightened on the scope. They're burning contraband, she said. Books, data slates, pre-compliance tech. Faith policing progress, Cade said dryly, the usual duet. But as the wind shifted, he saw something else among the prisoners chained to a metal post. A man wearing a tattered coat stitched with the sigil of a serpent eating its own tail. Cade froze. That's Rethan Jor, he whispered. Smuggler, captain of the Mercy's debt. The one who owes you a ship? And 3 deaths, Cade said. Guess he's trying to pay them all at once. They descended through the slag valley with the silence of men who know sound is currency. The closer they got, the worse the air became. Copper, oil, ozone, and the sweet rot of burning parchment. The Mechanicus fire pit roared with the light of heresy purged, casting shadows like saints with knives. The Skitari leader stood at the edge of the pyre, face hidden behind a red-etched mask, vox clicking with the pulse of binary cant. Transgression acknowledged. Payment rendered. Purity restored. Rethan spat blood onto his boots. You want purity? Try bleeding out here without air. The leader's augmetic arm snapped forward, striking him across the face with mechanical precision. Cade watched from behind a broken hauler chassis. You see that? He murmured. Alara nodded grimly. Public cleansing. Someone reported him. No, Cade said, eyes narrowing. Someone's waiting for us. The mark under his sternum pulsed, once. Not hot, cold, like a signal bounced back from something listening. He scanned the ridgeline beyond the camp. The storm haze shimmered, too uniform to be natural. He caught the faint outline of a transport, sleek, black, armored, the kind the Inquisition used when it wanted to be seen and obeyed. Alara, he said quietly. We've been herded. By the time they reached Rethan, the first Skitari had already fallen. Cade's shot was clean. A single crack that dropped the augmetic soldier before his targeting matrix could turn. The others turned in eerie unison, eyes flaring red, weapons whining as they charged. Move! Cade barked, diving for the pyre's base. Firelight painted the air in bronze and shadow. Alara raised her palm, and the ground rippled. The energy discharge from her augmetics shorting the nearest Skitari's servo leg, sending it crashing into the flame. Blasphemy detected, one of them intoned before her voice disintegrated in static. Cade slit Rethan's binds with his knife. "Still alive, old bastard?" Rethan coughed, blood and soot spilling from cracked lips. "Depends who's asking." "The man you owe a ship to." The smuggler grinned, teeth yellow and sharp. "Then you're early." "Come on," Cade said, hauling him to his feet. "We've got guests inbound." They fought their way through the dunes as the inquisitorial transport descended in a storm of dust. Its thrusters turned the sand to glass. The ramp opened before it even landed, revealing the same masked figure, cloak swept back. Silver rosette gleaming faintly under its own light. "Contractor Vorn," the voice carried, warped by the vox but unmistakable. "Every time I think you've learned discretion, you find a new way to embarrass my patience." Cade turned, rifle raised. "You built this ambush." "I refined it," the Inquisitor said. "The Mechanicus were happy to provide bait. All I needed was your instinct for misplaced mercy." Rethan spat again. "Guess I'm the worm on the hook." Cade's jaw clenched. "You're still breathing." "Act like it." The Inquisitor descended the ramp, steps measured, confident. The air warped around him with a pressure Cade could feel in his teeth. "You've stolen a fragment of the Astronomicon, Cade. You walk with the Emperor's echo burning inside you. You think you can live outside his order?" Cade's reply was flat. "I don't live outside it. I live under it. And I'm tired of the ceiling." The Inquisitor extended a hand. "Give me the mark. End the noise." "You'll sleep again." Alara stepped between them. "If he gives it, it dies. And when it dies, so does everything it remembers." The mask tilted toward her. "You misunderstand what memory means to gods." "I understand enough," she said. "He's not your vessel anymore." For the first time, the Inquisitor's voice softened. "You think the Emperor asks for permission? You think your defiance means anything to a son?" Cade's laugh was low, bitter. "You're not a son. You're a shadow pretending you cast light." Then he fired. The shot struck the rosette dead center. The world went white. When the light cleared, the Inquisitor was still standing. Smoke rose from the mark on his chest, but his voice was calm. "I warned you," he said. "Faith doesn't die from bullets." Behind him, the wreckage of the Mechanicus camp ignited again. Not from fire, but from sound. A low, harmonic pulse spread across the dunes, shaking dust from the stars. The mark in Cade's chest answered it, flaring so bright it burned through his shirt. Alara screamed his name. The Inquisitor raised his palm. "You see? The throne remembers its own." Cade staggered forward, vision swimming in gold and red. "Maybe it remembers," he gasped, "but it never learns." He slammed the rifle's bayonet into the sand, grounding the mark's energy through the blade. Lightning erupted from the ground, arcing into the camp, the pyre, the transport, every circuit of holy iron turning against its master. The explosion tore the sky. When the echo faded, the Inquisitor was gone. The transport lay half-buried, molten and silent. The mark dimmed, its glow settling into something less divine and more human. Cade knelt, breathing hard. "That buys us time," Rethan groaned, looking at the horizon. "Time for what?" Cade stood, eyes on the storm gathering over the hive they'd left behind. "For the Imperium to start wondering if their god can bleed." Alara watched the last flames flicker out, and when they do, Cade checked his rifle. "We make sure it hurts." The wind carried the smell of metal and rain. Rare, impossible rain. Somewhere far above, thunder rolled over the wastes like a closing hymn. The rain came like a rumor that decided to risk being true. It pattered across the slag until each grain wore a dark halo, then gathered into runnels that traced old wounds in the earth. Cade tasted iron on his tongue and knew it wasn't weather so much as a machine's brief kindness. Condensers on some distant relay tower bleeding pressure, mist stitched to ash until it pretended to be sky. The waste drank without gratitude. Alara stood with her face tilted up, eyes closed, letting the droplets mark her skin as if counting her back into the world one dot at a time. Rethan coughed a laugh that had to fight its way through soot. "You bring storms, Vorn. Last time we met, I lost a hull and a liver. Today, you owe me a ship." "You owe me 3 deaths," Cade said, and felt the edge soften in spite of himself. "We can make even by surviving." "Then we'll be in debt forever," the smuggler said, and gestured with his chin toward the east. "Red Warrens are that way. My people stash a crawler under a glass fall. If the Inquisition didn't sniff it out?" "If they had, we'd be ash," Cade said. "Move." They crossed a plain where the slag had cooled into ribs. The mark beneath Cade's sternum kept time like a drummer learning restraint. He could feel it. Quieter, not cowed. Watching. A coal that refused to admit it had ever tried to be a son. When he glanced at Alara, she met the look with equal parts worry and recognition. She had been listening to the same silence and found shape in it. "They'll say you're a saint," she murmured. as if thoroughly exhausted by the notion in advance. The pilgrims who saw the Aquila fall, the ones who heard the mechanist scream the truth. They'll call you the man who wounded the shadow. I'm nobody's statue, Cade said. I don't hold pigeons well. Statues don't bleed when the pilgrims touch them, she said. You do. He let the subject die, because even as a joke it itched. He had seen too many shrines lit by the oil of men who wanted to be remembered, and the wax of men who couldn't afford to be. The Imperium ate heroes the same way it ate cowards, ground into a story first, then into light. He was already a rumor when he needed to be a plan. They reached the Red Warrens at dusk, or at some hour that wore dusk's colors as a disguise. The Warrens were not a place so much as a scattered decision. Half-buried habstacks, the shattered ribs of a beacon tower, a circle of crawler shells pulled into a defensive crescent, and at the center, a kiln the size of a house turned into a hearth. Figures stepped from the lee of wreckage as the trio approached. Las carbines leveled but muzzles down, men and women wrapped in dust cloaks stitched with talismans made from broken transistors and Saint nails. Rethan, a voice called, sardonic with relief. Either you learned to die quieter, or you brought more trouble than usual. A woman with a half-face of chrome walked out from behind a tangle of fuel drums. Her augmetic cheek shone like a coin in the firelight. The flesh half of her face wore a scar that looked like writing in a language the skin had refused to learn. Cade knew her by the way she carried her rifle, low, bored, ready. Sarah Malk, salvage captain, occasional moral compass with a wildly inaccurate needle. You still breathing, Malk? Rethan rasped. I need a favor and a lie. You always do. Her gaze took in Cade and the weapon he didn't bother lowering, then slid to Alara and the way the air around her kept a respectful distance. And you brought a candle in a powder magazine. She's the reason we're not dead, Cade said. Then she's the reason they're coming, Malk returned, and whistled to her crew. Get them under glass. We talk where the wind doesn't have ears. Under glass turned out to be a cavern formed when a promethium heat front melted sand into a visor, and collapse turned visor into roof. Inside the air was cooler, the light soot-soft. Someone had coaxed a sump into a pool and taught it to be drinkable. Malk sat them near a table cut from a shuttle wing, and motioned for a kid with a servo hand to bring tin cups. The liquid stung. Cade drank anyway. All right, Malk said. News first, romance later. The Shrine Quarter is a riot. Arbits cracking heads, ecclesiarchy handing out icons like bandages, gangs looting purity seals because they sell better than bullets. Someone on every level swears they heard the Emperor cough. That one wasn't me, Cade said. Heard plenty of coughing, though. Second, Malk continued, the Inquisition is sweeping. They've sealed transit routes and turned off pilgrim lifts. They've got proxies on the roads and black flyers hugging the hub line. They're not subtle, which means they're scared. Or certain, Alara said. When a god decides it can't be loved, it decides it will be obeyed. Malk looked at her for a long second, then shifted attention to Cade. And you? You look like a man arguing with his own chest. He's carrying something, Rathan said. A piece of the beacon. A bite of the big light. Malk's augmetic whirred as she raised an eyebrow she no longer had. And you brought it here? Don't worry, Cade said. It doesn't eat much if you don't feed it worship. And if you do? It asks for seconds, he said. Then thirds. Malk spat into the dust and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. So, you need a crawler, you need a ship, and you need a way through a cordon locked by people who think paperwork is a sacrament. In exchange, you offer me a war. In exchange, Cade said, I offer you a target. Malk's crew drifted closer to listen. Salvagers smell opportunity like sharks smell iron. Cade spread a ragged map Rethan produced from his coat. Hive spurs, ash lanes, radio dead zones drawn in a calligrapher's neat defiance. He tapped a point west of the Warrens. Mechanicus relay. Tithing substation for the Shrine Quarter. It amplifies sermons and scrub signals that don't wear the right incense. We punch it, we get a seam to run a ship through. Maybe we also cut the throat of whatever story they're trying to staple over the riot. Malk nodded slowly. Station 97. Heard of it. Rumor says it sits on Old Dark, pre-compliance conduit. They built the Vox Cathedral on a ghost's spine. Ghosts I can handle, Cade said. Priests scare me. It's always the living, Malk agreed. Fine, I'll spin up a crew. But I'm not gifting you a ship out of charity, Vorn. We take the relay, we split what falls out. If a landing window opens, my people go first. Done, Cade said too quickly. He wanted the station more than the escape. He wanted the moment when the Imperium's voice went hoarse. Alara watched him over the rim of her tin cup. And after the relay? After, he said. We make the masked ones stop smiling. Malk's mouth twitched. I like a man who sets realistic goals. The plan ran on scrounge and audacity. Malk's crew had a crawler hidden under a sheet of fused glass and black tarp, its wheels wrapped in prayer flags stolen from a convoy of desperate penitents. The engine coughed awake with a sound like a metal dog clearing its throat. Cade, Alara, Rethan, Malk, and 3 salvagers who insisted on being called Pith, Grin, and Mercy piled into the chassis. The crawler nosed into the night, and the wastes closed behind them as if nothing had ever happened under their sky. They rode in a silence made from tired men saving words for when they'd matter. Cade counted the intervals between the mark's quiet pulses. Alara leaned against the bulkhead, eyes closed, lips moving in a knot prayer that mapped pressure and pattern, listening to the undermusic of the dunes. Rethan slept with his mouth open, a knifeman's rest that still found a way to look like insult. Malk drove with 2 fingers and a frown. Station 9-7 rose from the slag like a tooth left behind by a patient too scared to pull it. Vox masts bristled from its crown, each tipped with a saint's skull plated in copper. Runes crawled across the skin of the tower like lichen. Frequency codes, benedictions, death notices. At the base sat a ring of pilgrim shacks that had long ago been told their proximity to holiness counted as rent. Pith clicked his tongue. 2 squads, maybe 3. Maglevin bound every hour. Shielding on the east flank looks patched with hope. Hope tears easy, Malk said. Grin, Mercy. Get the charge sledge to the south anchor. Vorn, you've got the west gantry. Shoot pious, not pretty. Candle girl? Alara, Cade said. Alara. Malk's voice softened by an atom. Find me a way to make its song go wrong. Alara slipped down from the crawler and became smoke. Cade took the west, moving along a trench cut by runoff until it brought him close enough to hear the station's hum. Layered tones, one as flat as a bureaucrat's pulse, one as ragged as a sermon shouted into a storm. The pilgrims at the base muttered and shivered, warmed by proximity to authority. A mechanicus overseer walked the ring, staff tapping a slow time against plates engraved with the Omnissiah's honorifics. Cade sighted, exhaled, and took the staff first. It clanged, the sound wrong enough to turn heads before the body did. He moved before the echo found its home, 3 shots pinning disbelief to walls. The alarm's first syllable died on a tongue that had learned to love systems and had never prepared to pronounce ambush. Then the station woke properly. Klaxons howled. Runes flared. The Vox masts lifted their skulls like hounds scenting. Cade sprinted for the gantry as Pith's sledge detonated on the south anchor with a polite cough that became a deep, pleased roar. Metal shuddered underfoot. Pilgrims scattered. Not because they understood, but because their legs had been trained by a lifetime of being near collapses. The hive loomed again, a monolith of prayers welded to suffering. It stood like a sermon made of metal, its spires punching through clouds that no longer remembered what color was supposed to mean. Lightning crawled through the fog, not from the sky, but from within the city itself. Every cable hummed, every lumen flickered as though the entire structure were caught between remembering and forgetting its purpose. Cade, Alara, and Rethan reached the base of the shrine quarter before dawn. The air there was sharp and restless, full of ozone and something older, fear rediscovered. The riots had burned out, but not because anyone had won. Streets were empty except for smoldering sensors and bodies that looked too tired to finish dying. Feels wrong, Rethan muttered, checking the chamber on his pistol. No preachers, no enforcers, just quiet. Cade adjusted the strap of his rifle. They're watching, waiting for the next command that doesn't come. Alara stopped at a cracked mural where the paint had blistered off the stone. Beneath the burn marks, the image was barely visible. A golden figure with no face, arms outstretched, halo cracked down the middle. They've been told all their lives to obey the light, she said. Now they're realizing the light never obeyed them. They walked on. The streets narrowed into the arteries of the shrine district. Vox poles hung low, their speakers drooling static that stuttered into phrases. Mercy is error. Submission is error. The signal from Station 9-7 had reached this far. The lie was unraveling itself. At the base of the Grand Cathedral of St. Velathrix, the gates stood open. Once, pilgrims would have queued for miles to kneel beneath its arch. Now, the arch was black with soot, and the only light came from fires guttering in the holy fonts. Inside, the air was thick with incense that had burned too long. Rows of statues stared down through dust. Some had lost their eyes. Others wept rust. The floor was cracked where explosions had loosened the foundation, and through those cracks, something pulsed faintly, light, gold, and sickly, as if the earth itself were running a fever. Cade felt it before he saw it. The mark under his sternum began to throb again, not with pain this time, but with recognition. "He's here," he said quietly. Alara's hand went to her sidearm. "The Inquisitor?" "Not just him." Cade's voice was steady but low. Whatever was speaking through him. The cathedral's main aisle stretched ahead like a throat. At the far end, where the altar should have stood, there was a doorway carved into the stone. It wasn't new, but it hadn't been meant to open. It breathed faint light. They approached. Rethan muttered a prayer he didn't believe in. "If we go through that, we're not coming back." Cade glanced at him. "We haven't been back for a long time." He stepped through. The world inside the doorway wasn't a place. It was a thought, unfinished, circular, echoing itself until the echo became a wall. The ground was smooth metal that shifted like liquid underfoot, each step sending ripples through mirrored light. Shapes moved within the reflection. Versions of the world that didn't agree on which century it was. A battlefield blurred into a manufactorum into a chapel into a graveyard. And at the center of it all, the Inquisitor waited. His mask was cracked now, the fissure glowing faintly from within, as though light were trying to crawl out and failing. "Contractor Vorn," he said. At last, Alara raised her pistol. "You should have stayed buried." The Inquisitor ignored her. "You think you freed something by corrupting my signal. You think rebellion is truth because obedience hurt you. But you don't understand the weight of the mechanism you're fighting." Cade stopped 5 paces away. "Then explain it before I end it." The Inquisitor tilted his head. "The throne does not need believers. It needs function. The Astronomicon isn't a god. It's a wound that must stay open, or humanity forgets how to walk straight. What you carry is a sliver of that wound. It talks to you because it wants to survive. Just like you." Alara's breath hitched. "You're saying the Emperor isn't alive?" The Inquisitor finished. "He's a network. You've cut one of its nerves. It's going to grow another." Cade tightened his grip on the rifle. "Then let's cauterize the whole thing." The mask's crack widened, spilling thin light across the floor. "You can't kill an idea by hating it," the Inquisitor said. "You have to replace it." "I'm not here to replace it," Cade said. "I'm here to stop it from owning the parts of us that still remember what we were before the noise." He lifted the rifle. But before he could fire, the mark inside him flared, so bright it drove him to one knee. Enough. The voice wasn't the Inquisitor's. It wasn't the Emperor's. It was his own, reflected back through the mark, distorted, multiplied. Every heartbeat he'd ever had came back at once, speaking the same word. The Inquisitor stepped closer. "You see? It doesn't speak to you. It speaks as you. It's not possession, it's inheritance." Cade gasped, his skin glowing faintly from within. Alara grabbed his arm, shouting something he couldn't hear. The light inside him was pulling apart his veins, drawing lines across his body like circuitry. Through the glare, he saw the Inquisitor raise his hand, open, waiting. "Give it to me," the Inquisitor said softly. "Let me carry it. You can rest." Cade forced his head up. "That's the difference between us," he said. "You want to carry it. I just want to stop it from carrying everyone else." He slammed the butt of his rifle into the metal floor. The sound cracked through the chamber like thunder. The reflection shattered. Light poured up like water from a burst vein. The Inquisitor's mask split open, revealing not a face, but a hollow of blinding gold. A scream tore from the light, too high, too vast, like feedback from a dying star. Alara pulled Cade back, but the light followed, trying to fill the space between their ribs. "Now!" she shouted. Cade reached for the mark. It was molten, pulsing, alive. He thought of every face that had burned for someone else's idea of salvation. The soldiers in the trenches, the pilgrims in line, the slaves who called their chains relics. He thought of them and closed his hand. The light didn't explode. It imploded. The sound vanished. The reflection froze. The gold dimmed into dust. When Cade opened his eyes, the Inquisitor was gone. Only the mask remained, cracked and empty, lying in the ash like a coin spent too often. Alara knelt beside him. "Cade," he exhaled. The mark was gone. His chest was just a chest again, scarred, human, and empty in the best possible way. "It's over," she said. He looked around the room. The metal was cold. The door behind them was gone, sealed as if it had never existed. "No," he said, "it's quieter. That's all." They climbed back through the broken cathedral as dawn bled through the haze. The riots had stilled completely now. Pilgrims knelt in the streets, staring at the horizon where the Astronomicon's false halo had faded to gray. For the first time in millennia, the sky over perdition was dark, honest dark. Rathan limped toward them, dragging a crate of ammunition and wearing a grin that refused to die. "Well," he said, "if anyone asks, tell them I never liked religion anyway." Cade chuckled weakly. "You're getting paid in freedom." "That worth much these days?" "Depends how long it lasts." Alara looked east, where the hive met the dead plains. They'll come for us again. Someone always rebuilds the lie, Cade nodded. Then we'll break it again. He slung his rifle, felt its weight settle against his back, and started walking. Behind him, the great cathedral shuddered, its stained glass collapsing inward. The shards fell like dying stars, glinting once before the dust claimed them. In the silence that followed, the hive breathed. Not in worship, in relief. Cade didn't look back. The light might lie, but the road didn't. It waited, quiet, endless, and free. End of script.